Welcome to All Clear, the podcast that takes you beyond the rails. Brought to you by the team at Australian Jumping, this podcast dives into the stories, the people, and the horses shaping our sport. Whether you're a seasoned competitor or simply love the thrill of the clear round, All Clear delivers the conversations that matter. Hit subscribe and join us for a fresh perspective on the sport you love. Today's guest is one of Australia's most respected show jumping figures, Les Bunning. Les began his career in Victoria in the early 1960s, learning under Art Uytendaal and making his mark early with a junior championship win at Olympic Park. He went on to become a two-time Australian show jumping champion, winning in 1977 with Gay Scott and again in 1989 with St Diamond. He also represented Australia internationally and in more recent years became a central figure in Western Australia, respected not only for his results, for his work as a coach and a mentor. Les's story spans generations of the sport and offers a rare insight into how Australian jumping has evolved over time. Welcome to All Clear, Les.
Thank you very much, Joe.
Les, can you take us right back to the beginning and tell us how horses first came into your life growing up in Victoria?
Joe, my family wasn't horsey as such. I think my dad had a slight interest in a couple of trotters, but when I was about 4-year-old, Mum and Dad split up for a while and we moved to Flemington to live with my uncle and my grandmother. Now, my uncle was a well-known trotting driver. He trained trotting horses, and so we went there right in the middle of Flemington when we were young. And obviously he had trotters and I couldn't ride the trotters. So one day they took me next door, and the fellow that lives next door to him was John Paddo Patterson, who was famous for being the clerk of the course at Flemington for years, Sub-Zero, all that sort of stuff. But he was a young guy working for a racehorse trainer, and his lead ponies were next door to my Uncle Len's place. And actually that place is still there. But anyway, one day they took me next door and sat me on one of the lead ponies, and I thought, this is pretty good. So every chance I got, I used to jump the fence and get on the lead pony and ride him around the yard. So John came up to me one day and said, if you're going to keep doing this, Les, he said, I'm going to have to teach you how to ride. So he took me over to a sand area behind one of the other stables and gave me a few lessons, and then away we went. So while we were at my uncle's, they bought me a pony and I just got into it. Mum and Dad got back together and we had the pony like in a little stable at the back of the house, and just a normal house block in Deer Park. And anyway, she ended up getting colic and died. And so they got me another pony, and I was really keen, and Slicker did a bit for me for a while, and then there was a suggestion that I should go to Pony Club. We ended up buying another pony and headed off to Braybrook Pony Club at Truganina, not far from where we were. I had an uncle by marriage, a guy called Jack Patton, and he was more or less my coach in those early days, and he coached at that pony club, and it went on from there. I wanted to do a bit of jumping. Dad got me another, like a bigger pony, and that proved okay for a while. And then I got a thoroughbred horse that did a bit of eventing, and Jack used to say to my father, Des, you've got to get Les a better horse. And he had a horse racing at Wangaratta this one time when I was about 12-year-old, and we went up with him to Wangaratta and we tried this horse. And actually we tried another horse as well, and it turned out to be good, a horse called Custom that the Roycrofts ended up with. But he didn't suit me, and we went round the corner and tried this grey horse, and he turned out to be Glenara, and Glenara was really the start of it for me. We were at Pony Club, and he obviously was a really good jumper, and Uncle Jack used to give me lessons, and I thought I was going pretty well. And he suggested that because the horse was so good that it needed to be better educated, and he suggested that Dad take me to Art Uytendaal for some lessons, and so that started. And Art said, look, the horse needs a bit of education. So the horse stayed with Art at the time, and I used to go to Art's twice a week for lessons, and it pretty much went on from there. I went through the whole Pony Club thing. I was at Braybrook Pony Club and ended up at Tullamarine Pony Club. The Thomas family organised, they put that together, and it became a really strong pony club in Melbourne and teams events, and I got into the eventing as well. I had another horse that evented. And I guess I was, at the start, I was like most kids that started off, thought they could ride. And we used to take Glenara to the shows and he'd stop out and then Art would ride him in the speed class at the end of the day and jump clean. So this went on for about 4 or 5 shows until one day I jumped a clean round and got a place, and then I was on my way. And Mum and Dad were great, carted me everywhere, Adelaide show, those sort of things. And I used to ride against people like George Sanna and Rod Brown. Glenn Fryer was very big then because Art worked for his father then, and Glenn was into the show jumping then. He's more into dressage now, but he was one of the main competitors. There was, as I said, George Sanna. At the time, there were people like Howard Ward that was very good. He used to win all the riding classes. And because I had to do all that when I was younger as well, Mum wanted me to do all the hack classes and whatnot. And so, yeah, we just kept going. One day we were at Colac Show and I met Robbie Allen, and I fell in love with that whole idea of having a truckload of horses and a caravan on the back and wanting to do the shows. And Mum and Dad weren't that keen on that sort of idea. So even at one stage there, I said, oh, look, I want to go to the shows. I'm sick to death of this going to school stuff. So I hitchhiked from where we lived to Hamilton Showground in Victoria, and where Robbie and his mum were. And his mum gave me a real dressing down, give me a feed, and she said, righto, Leslie, you get back on the road and hitchhike back home again, which I did. But I was obviously very keen then, and Glenara had just turned into a great horse. He won the junior championships in '66 at Olympic Park, and yeah, I was on my way then. That's all I wanted to do. So my last year at school, like year 12, was just a waste of time really, because all I wanted to do was go to the shows. And so from there, when I turned 18, I got my driver's license, and a week later, I got my truck license, and we had a little Bedford truck, and I put Glenara and a couple of other horses that I had and off to do the shows down in Gippsland. And at the same time, I was eventing as well. I had a horse that we evented, and Mum was always keen on me doing the eventing. And he was a good horse, a third in the open thread event at Melbourne one year. And it was the year that Ernie Barker won, I think it was 69. He won it on a horse called Sammy. And it's a different era then, because Sammy won the 3-day event. And then a few days later, because it coincides with the Melbourne show, he come out and jumped about 6'10" and won the puissance on the same horse. And it was just an amazing time. There was a lot of good riders. Ernie Barker obviously was a great rider, and he'd been an Olympian and whatnot. But so once I did that little run of shows, I come home, I did a bit of part-time work for Dad. He had a concreting business, so I did a bit of labouring to make a bit of money. But then we finally ended up getting a better truck, and we did get a caravan, and I grabbed Mum and we went off and started doing the shows around New South Wales and that. And then Mum didn't really enjoy it. And then I had a bad fall once at Finley Show, and it was the last class of the day. And Mum had said, oh, you jump in the last class and I'll go and put dinner on. And I had a fall and ended up in hospital. And Mum didn't know that, of course. And it was only Fran Cleland who wrote for the Weekly Times. She was a judge, I think, at the show, and she saw the horse tied up in the stables with the saddle on, and she went and spoke to Mum and helped her feet up. Mum was paralysed down one side, so she couldn't do a lot with the horses. Fran helped me, and anyway, eventually I come back from the hospital, and she said, Les, that's it. Let's go home. I've had enough of this. Back home we went. And I'd had the bug by then, and I just wanted to go and do a lot more shows. Yeah, so it went from there. We went and did the show. I had a little bunch of horses that I used to go, and it was just me and the caravan and a few horses. It was a lot different then. But in that period of time, people like Marie Hewitt, Vicki Roycroft, Colleen Brook, they were all travelling around on their own doing shows with a truckload of horses, and I was pretty much the same. It was that sort of era where you didn't worry too much about what happened outside the shows. It was just showground to showground and having a really great time.
Did you continue to train with Art during that time? Was he still your coach?
Definitely. Art has played an enormous role in my life as a coach. Even he moved where he was, Dandenong, to another place, I think at Narrewarra, and then he moved out to Whittlesea, where Russell Johnson is at the moment, and he built that place. And I was always having lessons with him when I was at home, and he'd try to get me sitting in a better position. But unlike a few riders in that area, you'd go out and do a run of shows and you'd run into Kevin Bacon and Johnny Faye, and they'd have that kick-up style. And I thought, God, that must be the way to do it. And because Art's trying to teach me to do it the right way, and I was trying to train myself to do it the wrong way. And so I got into that habit, and I was one of those riders that when we could use tie downs on our stirrup leathers, we did until they banned them. And then, but Art played a big role. Yeah, he was a real mentor to me, and he was such a helpful guy and a great horseman. And yeah, I look back on all that period and how lucky I was to have him as a coach. Yeah.
Yeah, he was such an influence on so many riders. And the funny thing is that you saying that you looked at like Johnny Faye and the others with that style. And when I've spoken with them on the podcast, they've gone, oh, we saw what they were doing down south under Art Uytendaal. I thought, oh gosh, we must be doing this wrong.
Yeah, he was an immaculate rider. We talk about him as a coach, but he was an immaculate rider. The horses were so well trained. You know, he educated them so well, and he just continually brought horses out and jumped at the top level in that period of time. And yeah, he was an absolute legend. As I said, I thank God that I hooked up with him and he taught me so much.
It must have been great, just the group of riders as well that you mentioned that you coming up with, like with George and Vicki and Marie, all of those people. And in fact, I did actually chat with George about you briefly, and he said that it was always incredibly competitive between you, but it also turned into a really strong friendship. And at the end of our conversation, he said he's a good guy. So that's what George had to say about you.
George is a great guy, and we did lock horns quite a lot when we travelled and run into each other at shows. It was always sit round after the shows as a group. Not only George, but everyone used to get together, and that pretty much that went right the way through. Even when the biggest shows, the Bon Connell era, they were still doing it then. We'd pull up even when they had the international riders come over, and in the evenings you'd be sitting around having a drink with them, sitting on bales of hay. So that side of it's changed a bit, obviously, but yeah, they were a pretty hard bunch to ride against, like George, Rod, Gary Mallinson, Pauline, Vicki. They did all the shows then, and obviously Johnny Faye, Sam Campbell, Kevin Bacon. He turned up everywhere, and you really have to be on your game to win, and you have to have good horses, obviously. And then that's where I think sometimes a bit of luck comes into it, because I ended up with Gay Scott, and there's a good story there, because Carol and I were going out at the time, and we were at Pony Club together, and she had Gay Scott, and she did an amazing job educating him. He would win Anglo-Arab classes at the Royal, and she'd win her riding classes and hack classes. And so she was a full-time secondary teacher at Ararat, like a rural town in Victoria. It was very busy for her, and Scotty had one bad habit, and that was when she went to work, he was in a paddock on a little farm, and he'd just decide, I don't want to be here anymore, and he'd jump from paddock to get where he wanted to be. And I think that annoyed her. And then one day she said, look, I think it was in early 75. She said, look, this horse is driving me crazy. He's too good a horse to be doing that. Could you take him and see how you go? And I must say, if Gay Scott had an effect on her, because she did educate him, and he was such a lovely horse, like he was such a quiet, sweet horse. When she gave me him, that really changed my whole perspective on the sport. There's no doubt about it. Because Glenara was a good horse, and I won lots of 6 bars and Pusop and proper show jumping classes as well. But when he come along, I only had him for about 2 or 3 shows, and went to Adelaide and won the South Australian Championships on him. And so it just changed my whole perspective on what I was doing once I had him.
Well, what made him so special?
If he was around now, the thing about him, he was just so careful. Carolyn had educated him beautifully, so he was easy to ride, snaffled a bit, no nose manual. He was just a really lovely horse to ride, super careful. You had to be on the job with him, like you couldn't miss him. It didn't handle whacking jumps or being ridden badly, but I think his big attribute, he was just so clean, and you can, even though he might have lacked some of the scope that some of the horses at the time had, you could ride him at a tempo. Like, you could really ride him at that 400 metres a minute and use his ground speed to jump the biggest courses. So he was just a super horse. And if he was around now with the rails being light and the cup shallow, he would be an absolute star. He just didn't want to. He didn't want to knock jumps down. I know one year, the year before he won the Australian Championships after Melbourne show, we did all those Victorian shows, and he won every main class of those shows we did, except one. I had to divide it with Chris Smith on the very good Sanskrit, who was, without a doubt, one of the best horses that I'd seen as well. Yeah, he was just an amazing horse, yeah.
You went over to New Zealand in 1973, I think. Was that with Gay Scott?
I know, 1973 was with Glenara. I got called up the national service, and my father was beside himself because he'd fought in New Guinea, and the last thing he wanted me to do was go to Vietnam or anything like that. And at the time I had Glenara, and I had another horse called Daktari that Musgrove had jumped to A grade by winning 6 bars, and he was an amazing 6 bar. And I think just before I go on to the New Zealand trip, in those days, the 6 bars and the puissance events were pretty much like major events. And quite often, this is where Kevin Bacon taught me an awful lot. Quite often, it'd be in front of the bar at night in the 6 bar, and you'd end up jumping 6'2" or 3" at least. And then if you were equal, Kevin would say, "Oh, hang on, we won't split it. Let's have a talk to the committee and we'll get them to put more money on." And it was great. So anyway, the Daktari was an amazing 6 bar horse, and he jumped quite well. He wasn't as careful as Glenara, but he jumped quite well. And so in the end, I got a phone call saying, "Look, Peter Mullins didn't get his sprays and he can't go to New Zealand. Can you get your 2 horses? Can you join the team?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to." So I got a deferment from the Army, went on the boat with the horses to New Zealand, and of course, while I was away, the government changed and I never ended up doing national service. But to say, that was a great trip. New Zealand was fantastic. There was Marie Ewart, Guy Crichton, Trevor Morris, who probably not a lot of people know, but Trevor produced a lot of good horses at the time. My Melody Maker that Kevin Bacon took to Europe, he was quite a good rider. And of course, Ted Dwyer was our manager, and he was a legend of our sport back then, Ted. So that was a great trip. The only sad part about that trip, on the day I turned 21, Daktari jumped the last fence at a Grand Prix. When he landed, he broke his leg. So that was a sort of a sad part about that trip, that we lost him. But yeah. But all the other riders took the pain out of it and filled me full of alcohol that day.
And great that you didn't have to go and serve as well. That would have been a relief for your family, I'm sure.
But my father, definitely, he was so worried that I'd have to go to Vietnam, and I think his experience in New Guinea had him quite shaken about me going. But there you go. That's the way it turned out.
You won your first Australian Championship on Gay Scott in 77, didn't you?
Yeah, we had a good year, 77. He won the Horse of the Year, the championship at Barrostock, and then we went to Sydney Royal. And by the way, the Australian Championship was supposed to be at Maitland before Sydney show, and it got rained out, so they postponed it and run it after Sydney. And so I ended up going to Sydney, and Gay Scott won the Grand Prix at Sydney, and then our very next show was Maitland. And I went up to Maitland with Greg Smith, and Greg had a really good horse at the time, Petty Cash, and we stopped at a friend's place on the way up at Barrel, Stephen Moxon, and he said, when we got there late in the afternoon, and he said, "Look, we've just got enough time to get to the pub." And so we put the horses in the stables. I had a girl working for me, and she looked after the horses, and we went off to the pub, and then we ended up at a party down on the UM Highway, and it was a freezing cold night. And when I say freezing, there was ice on the road. And on the way back, Stephen lost control of the car. The car rolled, and we wrecked the car. Smithy was in the back stirring him on the whole time. And we got out of it all right, wrecked the car, and we was able to put the horses on the truck and head off to Maitland the next day for the Australian Championships. And when we got there, I had another young horse with me that was in front in one of the novice classes, and Faye had gone and had the first fence down, but the timer didn't work, so they let him start again, and he beat me. So I put in a protest, lost the protest, and I said to Smithy, God, Smithy, I said, we're running out of money here. We're going to have to run first and second. And we did. So we kept going and doing our run of shows after the Australian Championships. But yeah, and that particular class, the way they run it, Gayscott jumped down and clean round. So class was over very quickly.
A quick shout out to Divas Beverages, who continue to back our sport. Their VCAT vodka isn't just popular, it's award-winning, Australian-made and crafted with the same care and commitment we see in every great horse and rider partnership. So when you see VCAT behind the bar or on the shelf, remember they're part of the reason we can keep having these conversations. Now back to our guest. Did you ever make it up to do the Queensland show runs? Because a lot of the people I've spoken to said they were incredible back in the day, the Queensland shows.
When I started travelling around doing the shows, one of my big bucket lists was to go to Cairns. And when I had Glenara and Daktari, I did a run of shows up in northern New South Wales. We Will Walgett, all those shows. And David Asimus was a good friend of mine. And he came up to me at one of the shows and he said, have you ever thought about going up to Cairns? And I said, I'd love to. It's just too hard for me. And he said, how about we go together? And I said, you've got me. I took the horses to Forbes and we loaded up the truck, and I think we towed my caravan and his truck, and off to Cairns we went. We obviously did the shows in southern Queensland first, like the whole run. We started off down sort of at Bundaberg and just did that whole run. And that year there was obviously Guy Crichton, Peter Mullins. I think at the time Guy was riding for one of the big teams, and there was trotters up there and everything. So we had a great. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I know when we left Bundaberg, we didn't have a lot of money. So when we got to Townsville, we were living off Dagwood dogs, DA and I, but we had a good show at Townsville, and then off we went because we bought a lot of horse feed at Bundaberg to go all the way north. So but like in those days, we started in everything. Daktari, I know at Bundaberg, he won the walking horse. DA used to win his riding class at every show, gentleman rider, and he'd start. There was a horse called Luck Enough. He'd started in the barrel race, and we did everything. But lucky, the Daktari horse, he was very good. He'd win or get placed in the 6 bars all the time. He'd jump over 7 foot in the high jumps up there. So I had a ball. And the one thing I really wanted to do, as I said, was get to Cairns show, an old history of Cairns show. So we pulled into Cairns show, I think it was about lunchtime, and pulled onto the showgrounds, and DA got out of the truck, and there was a guy in a car waiting for him. And he said, look, you'll be right with the horses for a few days. I'm off to Mareeba Rodeo. So he took 2 steps in a bag and got in a car and he disappeared. So I was on my own with the horses, stabling and all that. Not that there wasn't a lot of people there. There was a lot of riders up there, but yeah. And that's pretty much what DA was like. He had his own way of doing things, and I loved him for that. And I must say, I thoroughly miss him. Like anyone that knew David Asimus, you couldn't help but love the man. He was just something else, and to lose him the way we did was just so sad. But anyway, we did those shows, and then back to Brisbane. Not that I enjoyed Brisbane show. I had glandular fever and spent the whole time up in the loft, and DA used to get me down just to ride in the classes. But yeah, it was a great trip. We had a ball. Yeah.
Could you win enough to keep you going?
No, I think you could win enough, but you didn't have to win a lot to keep going. If you won $400 or $500 in a week, that would feed the horses, put fuel in the truck, pay the entries for the next show, and then away you go. But at that time in my life, I was living from show to show. And when I got back after that Queensland trip, I had to work quite a bit for Dad as a labourer before I could build up enough money. And then it's about that time that Gayscott come along. And Gayscott was a sort of horse that you only needed him on the truck. And how he put up with it, I don't know. It's just that he had such a great temperament. You'd go to these shows and they'd live in yards and covered yards sometimes if they're lucky. Tie a lead rope across in front of them and none of them would ever get out. That wouldn't happen today. But Gayscott would always win plenty of money. I know I even did, up in northern Victoria, I did 2 shows in the one weekend, like in the one day. I jumped in the main class at one show and put them on the truck and drove to the Cobram Peaches and Cream Festival, and they held the main class up for me to get there so I could compete, and he won it. Yeah, he was a real money winner. But I think after about that time, that was in the 70s, by the time the 80s were coming around, it was a little more expensive to do. And just at that time, Dad and I were always at each other's throat about the place and that. So all I wanted to do was get in the truck and go somewhere. At one time, I took up and leased a farm up at Tatura, broke in racehorses and tried to produce a few show jumpers, and got involved with a guy called Andrew Keane and his wife Robin, and we bought and sold a few at that time. And one of those horses was a horse called Blazing Bridles, and he was a souvenir horse. He was by a Sanna souvenir, I think, but lovely big black horse with a big white face. And he was one of the good young horses that we bought that we ended up selling. I sold him to a bond corporation director over here in Perth, and they wanted me to bring the horse over. They said, look, we'll buy him, and we bought a hack for our daughter. Could you bring them both over? And so we took the trip over to Australia and stayed with Tony and Nolan Oates at their farm. And they said, look, come back next year because the shows are going to be bigger than Ben-Hur. And I said, oh, yeah, what's happening? Oh, Laurie Lever and Alan Bond are going to run all these big shows. So I'd met Laurie over doing the shows in Victoria, and I rang him up and I said, Tony and Nolan want me to come back. I said, the shows are going to be big here. And he said, Les, they're going to be enormous. Come back. So the following year we come back. The money was ridiculously good over here. That's not 1981 it was. And I competed in my first Bond Derby that year and had the fastest time with the fence down, but still run fourth. And the money was food for. I had a couple other really good horses with me that was picking up prize money as well. And the horse that I'd sold to Tony and Nolan, the rider that was riding the horse, they'd had a difference of opinion. So they'd organised for an Irish rider and his family to come out and ride the horses. And at the end of that season, I went back and they rang me and said, oh, we're not getting on with our Irish man. Would you like to ride the horses? And I said, no, I'm committed here. I was engaged to a girl then, and I felt that was where my responsibility was. And so the horses ended up being ridden by Eric Musgrove. This is before he became a racehorse trainer. And my life changed big time. And again, talking about luck, in that period, Guy Crichton gave me a call and said, look, there's a really good horse coming over from Tasmania that I'm supposed to take for her. And he said, I just haven't got room. He said, could you fit him on your truck and you ride him? And it turned out to be Fairway. And I said, oh, yeah, I'll have a crack at him. And not only did I get a fantastic horse, but his owner, Julia Westfield, ended up grooming for me, caring for me, cooking for me for quite a few years. And he just turned out like the first big show we did was Sydney Royal, and he won 2 classes in Part 2 and was just, and he was then, again, luck would have it, he just turned into my best horse. But so we ended up coming back to Perth to do the shows the following year, and Eric was riding the horses. And when at the end of that run of shows, he went back to Victoria and decided to give it up. And they rang me again and said, look, Eric's going to be a racehorse trainer. Will you have a go at the horses then? So that was the end of 83. And so I ended up with all these horses and the truck and packed up. And so I picked the horses up at Eric's and packed up, and we moved to Perth. And that was great. It was big. The prize money was ridiculously good. Peter Cook ran all the shows, and if you didn't have a good show, if you didn't win 2 or 3 grand, you'd probably get your entries for free. It was just like that. And then, of course, in those days, all the riders come over. Guy, Johnny Faye, Chuggy, everyone come here at some stage. Barry Munt had a big team of horses. Kerry Langbacker, they were here every year. You could just keep naming riders that would come over here. And so I ended up getting Blazing Bridles back. And by far, he was a super horse. And at the end of the 1983 season, I wasn't at the top of the World Cup league, but I was set third or fourth or something like that. And they'd picked the Olympic team and a reserve, which was Alan Williams from Queensland. So Tony and I said, look, would you like to go over and experience that? And I said, I'd love to. And so they sent me with two horses to England, and Blazing Bridles was one of them. And he was he was very successful over there. And I had a girl working for me that had worked for Paul Schockermoller for 6 years. And as you probably know, in England, to get into those area international shows at that stage, you had to be in that computer list on the top 30 or 40 riders to even get an invitation to go there. So Annie kept ringing people up and getting him into these shows. And Blazing Bridles was winning and getting placed in good classes, even run fourth in a Grand Prix at Hickstead. And as that was an Olympic year, so there were American riders there, German riders there, and that particular class, I was one of the 4 clean rounds in the class, and I ended up running fourth, but Deister won it with Paul Schockermoller. I got to meet all these fantastic riders that I'd only read about and seen videos of, and it was an amazing experience for me. And if I ever had a chance to represent Australia at the top level, that was it, because Laurie Collin came up to me after that show. He said, look, Alan's horse is a bit sore and we want to know if you want to take the black horse down to Barcelona. And I said, I'd love to, but by that stage, Blazing Bridles had developed a soundness problem, and it was hard to keep him sound. And I think I only did a few more shows after that. But they were big shows. Like we went up and we got invited up to the Royal Show at Edinburgh, and he was good up there. Just everywhere he went, he was good. And I think if he had a Sade sound, he would have been an amazing horse in the future. So that was my trip there. The other horse I had with me won quite a few of the speed classes. I had a horse for Sue Bond at the time, a horse called Semi-Tough that had come over from America. She bought it and had him at a few shows, and he got placed. He was quite a tricky sort of horse, but I think David Dobson ended up with him in the long run, won some big classes on him as well. But so that was my trip to England. And I come home, we had a disagreement with the Oates family, and then I was out on my own. All the time goes through this period of my life, I'd started coaching and started to get a real love for that side of it. And I felt that, not that I thought that the prize money was going to finish at that stage, because it was all that Wentworth Park thing and Bond and Connell, and the money was still big time then. I just felt that I would really want to do a lot of teaching away from competing as well. So the coaching side of it became a big deal. And I just rented places here in Perth, and I got different jobs, different people. I worked for people, Norm Majors and his family, and Kate Majors, and she was quite a good young rider, and all that was great. Good horses. I was trying to get out on my own and get my own place. And I think 87, I ended up with a horse called Lincoln Green. One of the guys over here, George Hall, was a big sponsor over here, the transport company, and he had a horse that he used to race, and he'd send it over to Victoria with one of the riders, Peter Stagg, and Peter had produced him beautifully, and he was a tricky horse, but he could really jump. And one day he came up and he said, look, I'm going to bring him home, would you mind having a rider on him? And so that was the horse that I won the Bond Derby on in 87. And he was a good horse. He just was one of those tricky fellows. But on his day, he could beat the best. And that particular day he did. So, yeah.
That must have been a really memorable win for you, winning the Bond Derby, with it being such a major show. I can imagine that must stand out in your mind.
Oh, without a doubt. That was, every rider in Australia wanted to come here and win the Bond Derby, $15,000, and now $15,000 to win. And in those days, $15,000 was a heap of money to win in one class. And that was a great win. But of course, that was at that stage, 87 was when all the stock market crash started to happen. So from about 87 to 89, when they run the last one, it had all started to run a little downhill. And just on that prize money thing, after the Bond Derby, I was owed 20-something thousand dollars in prize money, including the Bond Derby. And a lot of the riders had started off that year in Queensland, Adelaide, Melbourne, and ended up here. And some of them were owed a lot of prize money because the money just wasn't coming through. Rothwell's was in trouble financially. And Sue Bond spoke to father, said, Dad, all these riders have been travelling around Australia competing for this money and they're not going to get paid. So he sent us all a message and said to come up to his office in Perth and he'd fix us all up. And it was all in the news. Everyone knew that these guys were having, Bond Corporation were having trouble. And when we were going up in the lift, we thought this is probably not going to be a great outcome. But, we got up there and he wrote us out a personal cheque for all the money that was owed to us. And I guess we were all apprehensive about whether the cheques go through or not. But sure enough, we all got our money. And I take my hat off to Alan for that. That was great. And so onwards, upwards we went.
To lose those shows and for that to all end, it must have been a disappointment to everybody.
It was. Everyone in Sydney that would know that Wentworth Park, those shows they used to run at Wentworth Park, were just the elite shows. You used to love doing that. It was just how we get back to that, I don't know. These guys just threw money in. They carted jumps from one side of Australia to the other to Queensland. They supplied everything. Connell would bring riders over from England, America, Germany, and we'd ride against them in the teams events at Wentworth Park. And it was just a small taste of what international show jumping was going to be like. And we made some great friendships with those guys. I know when I was in England, people like Nick Skelton and the Whittaker brothers, they really looked after me because they'd been over here and got to know each other well. And that was a great time. It was really the highlight of my show jumping experience, that 1980s, definitely 100%. Yeah.
Horizon Show Jumps was founded by people who genuinely love the sport, and that shows in everything they do. What started back in 2013 as a search for better quality jumps has grown into one of Australia's leading suppliers, with their fences now seen at major events like Melbourne Royal, Equitana and Auschamps. Horizon specialise in custom-made jumps for private arenas, eye-catching sponsor fences that really make brands pop, and a full range of hire equipment with designs that are regularly refreshed so courses always feel professional and current. And now Horizon are also building high-quality stables, carrying that same attention to detail and understanding of horses across your whole setup. So if you're looking to lift your arena, your barn or your next event, head to horizonshowjumps.com.au. And now back to our guest. And how did those shows here compare to what you experienced when you went to England? What would you say similarities, differences?
Yeah, I found in a lot of the shows, the area shows that we went to, the bigger ones, most of them were just like on a farm and they just mowed a paddock and put the jumps there, which is why we got into a lot of shows, because it was a dry summer and the grounds were hard. And so all the top guys used to scratch their horses, and so there were always areas, shows we could get into. And this is where Annie, the girl that was working for me, she was just fabulous. But if you go to shows like Wales and West, David Broom's place, that was an amazing setup. You had 3 or 4 rings. Hickstead was unbelievable, of course, and Windsor Show, the way they set Windsor Show up. Not only were they good shows, but you got to really see the top riders, not only in England, but they come over from Europe for those shows as well. And you really, I noticed so much the difference, the way they used to train their horses, prepare them for a show. Of course, the girls would get up in the morning and lunge him for half an hour. Then he'd have his breakfast. Paul would come from the hotel. They'd saddle him up. He'd work him for an hour. Not hard, but he'd work him for an hour. And then while he was walking the course, they'd give him a lunge. The girls would give him a lunge. and he'd get on him sort of 15 horses before he went in the ring. And in Australia, maybe we're changing a bit now, but we certainly didn't do it that way then. But to watch them and some of the American riders, just the way they prepared their horses was so much different. So this is going back in the 80s, but those top guys, they just knew how to prepare horses, condition horses in Europe. And I think a lot of our riders, with few exceptions, like I think George Sanna from day one was like that. He knew, it's probably because his father drummed it into him, but he knew how to educate a horse, prepare a horse, and then show a horse to the best of its ability. Not that he didn't have a couple of wild ones when he was a kid, but certainly as he developed, the education side of it was such an important thing for him. And I think that's why he's such an important coach now, and a successful one, obviously. But I think the young riders of today just never got to see him at his best, because he was a super rider, as some of the others were, but I always took my hat off to George. He just 100% wanted to do it the right way, and there was no other way in his mind. And still, I'm sure that's the way he is now with his pupils and that. Yeah, there was a big difference.
And in Australia, when you look over the years that you've been involved in the sport, is there anything you feel that we've lost along the way? What's your perspective on where we're at now compared to where we were those years ago?
I think I'm not a part of the mainstream show jumping now. Obviously, we go over to an Australian Championships here and there, and I get to see the top riders. And obviously, I know all the older riders. Anytime I meet up with the old riders, George included, Rod, all those guys, John McMillan, we talk about the old times and the camaraderie that we had. And I think that's changed a bit. It's not that everyone's not mates now, but we had so much more, I think, with each other when we travelled around the shows, when we did the shows. Royal shows in those days, we were there for 8 or 10 days. And so for 8 or 10 days, we were all together on a showground. And you'd do Sydney, Brisbane, not that I did Brisbane a lot, but Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide. So you got to see each other a lot, and we used to share things. And I think that's changed a bit. I think on the good side of it, that I think horse care, horse welfare has changed a lot for the better. And then like over the years, we just, the cost of it, everyone that's been on your podcast, I know, has spoken about the astronomical cost of doing the shows now. And so that's changed. So I think everyone realises now that change is here, and it's here for good. The breeding is a big part of it. The expense is a big part of it, and we can't change that. It's at the moment, it's user pay, and if we want to run big shows on beautiful grounds, which we seem to have now, unfortunately the riders have to kick in. And the time I hear about how much it costs to go to these bigger shows, I think how much does it cost to run these bigger shows? And then trying to find prize money, it's not always corporate money that pays for it. So I think that's where the big change has come, just the astronomical cost of it all. I don't know how riders get to the shows over these next few weeks with this war thing going on. It even adds a little bit more expense to the whole thing. But the horses don't know about it. The care of the horse, the welfare of the horse has become an important part of it. Obviously, the breeding side's changed. It's not just like we all used to get horses off the track back in the 70s, 80s, even 90s, and then a trickle of warm bloods come in, and now this century, it's all about trying to breed lovely horses. And the way it is now, you can pick the top stallions in the world and breed to the best mares here and end up with as good a horse here as you do in Europe. But it gets back to what I said before. There's just those few riders that can train them the way they need to be trained. That's where the big difference is now. It's at the top level, it's not for everyone now. It's because of the cost of it. But even if you're lucky enough to fluke a good young horse, it's then producing that horse. And I heard Rod Brown talking about it, and a couple of other people that you interviewed. It's getting him produced properly. And I think that's something that's to be kept to the top of the list of what riders need to do. Yeah.
That's definitely a theme that's come through with people that I've spoken with, especially some of the older or more experienced riders. In more recent years, you've been really involved with coaching and mentoring riders in Western Australia. What do you enjoy most about that role?
Right from the word go, when I started coaching, I really enjoyed doing it. And I've in Western Australia, not only like the senior riders, but I teach a lot of the younger ones, and I just really enjoy it, especially the EA squads and that, the young riders that I'm doing now. But even in the past, everyone that comes to those sort of things, those sort of groups, are looking to improve and do better, and to have that little bit of experience to try to put it back into these kids and give them the fundamentals are the same, and every coach probably delivers it a bit different. I think if the group of people, that the coaches that do, especially the qualified ones and the experienced ones, it's rewarding to get your message through to some of these riders and to see them have success. It just is very rewarding, and I just love doing it. And I still go to a couple of pony clubs and teach there, and I'm teaching from little kids right up to senior riders. But most of the senior riders at pony club now, they get to the point of jumping metre 10, metre 15. They want to go out and do the bigger shows. Pony club, I think, has changed a lot from when I went to pony club. It was your top pony club kids were your top juniors, and that's changed a bit. I don't know how we changed that, but I think the riders, pony club get good coaches, and they try to get good coaches all the time, and the better ones come through to a point where they just want to go on and do the better shows. And mum and dad now, they wouldn't be doing it if they didn't have a little bit of money. So mum and dad will try to get them a better horse, and when they get that better horse, they're trying to do the better shows. And yeah, but look, yeah, I love it. That's pretty much what I do now. I still kick one horse around, but he'll be my last one. He's just getting over an injury, so I'm going to miss the first part of this year as well. But this will probably be my last year in the saddle, I'd say. The old body's starting to tell me it's getting a bit harder. Yeah.
But that's a pretty impressive run, though. I can imagine that must be difficult if you've done something like that all of your life. I know when spoken with Vicki, and, when she had the medical incident, and I thought, what if she couldn't ride again? Once we knew she was going to be okay, but what if she couldn't ride again? I think it's been such a key part of your life, hasn't it?
Yeah, I had a daughter that was riding at a pretty good level. She was a good junior and a very good young rider as well. And when she decided to do the young rider classes, I stepped away from the horses. And the one that I was riding in the bigger classes here, I actually took him over as a young rider horse. And so I was basically retired then. But when our life changed, I was out on my own again. And she got married. She's had a kid since, so she's moved away from jumping. So I thought, we had one horse left over. I thought, oh, I'll ride him a little bit and sell him. And anyway, I started riding him, and he started winning a couple of classes. I thought, oh, I'll just hang on to him, the old fella. We bred him, and I'll just keep going. And he's still outside. He's acting as a carer for a couple of horses that we've got now, but I never sold him. But yeah, so I half got back into it, and my partner bred this horse that I'm riding now, and she, look, he's a nice horse. He's no champion, but I quite enjoy riding him. But he's had a checkered career with COVID, me getting a new knee put in, him having a few injury problems, a throat operation. He never really got going, but I still riding him. He's a good, safe fellow, but age catches up with you, Joe.
It sure does. Well, when you look back across your career, is there a particular moment or partnership that you feel most proud of?
Without a doubt, winning a couple of Australian championships were a big deal to me. The Bond Derby thing was good, but I think that association with Gay Scott, that period, was only about 3 years that we spent, 3 or 4 years we spent together. I think that period, I just loved it. He was such a lovely horse, and the way he finished was sad. There was a French team come here for a French festival in Melbourne, and we had to put one horse in the pool and keep one. And anyway, he got a New Zealand rider, got him, and he had a fall in the practice area and put a stud through his leg, and through his back leg, and he never come. But even after that, he won a national speed championship, and he won the 6 bar at Mildura Show 4 years in a row, and they rung me up the last time and said, look, are you coming back to defend your title? I said, he's retired. And they said, oh, we'd really love you to come back. So I took him back and he won it. So I think that when I look back on it, there was a lot of highlights in my time, but I think having a horse like that, well, I thank Carol Earl so much for the work that she did on him and letting me take him. Of course, she knew he was a super horse. So I think just that period of having Scotty would be the highlight of done the trips to England, and I took some horses to Spain, was sold here, and I did a few shows in Spain, and the trip to New Zealand was wonderful. But that period with Gay Scott was probably the highlight of my career, yeah.
It seems to me that marketing horses is challenging, and that there has been no quick and easy platform dedicated to connecting performance horses with potential new owners. So I developed Pro Horse Match to do exactly that. Based on the concept of a dating app, you can save your preferences, e.g. discipline, competition level, pedigree, age, price range, etc., and receive email and push notifications when a horse is listed that meets those criteria. Most importantly, listing a horse is quick and easy and can be done in less than a minute. The in-app chat is a key feature of the app, allowing for a real-time discussion between sellers and potential buyers to determine whether contact details are shared and the conversation should be taken offline. It is currently free to list with no payment details collected, so I encourage you to visit prohorsematch.com and join the hundreds of users already registered and check out the quality horses listed. Now back to our guest. If you could go back and give your 18-year-old self some advice, what would that be? But maybe there's that, but also if you could give young riders advice, what would that be?
The one regret that I had was that Mum and Dad put so much into me doing what I do, and Dad and I continually blued about minor things, and so all I wanted to do was get in the truck and be away from them. And I look back and think that's the one regret I had, that I didn't just tuck my tail between my legs and accept the way things were and appreciate what Mum and Dad had done for me. And so I would say that to all young riders now. Mum and Dad are gonna, if you're gonna stay in the business, they're gonna have to do an awful lot for you. And so you should really appreciate what they have done for you. So always remember just how important they were to you and are to you with the younger riders in your career as a rider. Yeah, definitely.
No, I think that's fantastic. Is there anything that we haven't spoken about today that you feel is important to share?
Not really. I think people, as I said, people always say, oh, the cost of shows, it's getting out of control. But I feel the progression is there. You just can't stop that sort of progress. I know in Western Australia, when they changed the grading system or did away with grading systems, it used to suit the people that used to, like, especially in the east, that breed horses. Because a lot of the classes are decided on ages now. They have the 4-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old, all that sort of thing. I think the grading system, when it changed here, it just didn't suit Western Australia. And we have a few really good people breeding horses here, and we have a few sponsors that kick money into it. But I think we're just a year or two behind where it is over east. And I think that's just the way it's going to be. I just felt that if we could have held off changing the system here a bit longer, would have suited Western Australia better. But as I said earlier, progress is progress, and you just can't stop it. The beautiful horses that are being bred now gives all the young people coming through the opportunity to ride world-class bred horses, if you like. Now it's up to them to get the training themselves so that they're good enough to educate the horses that they get. And I keep saying that to all the younger riders that I teach that are going on. You have to be able to, they see people like over here anyway, Roland, George Siciliano, I could name a few more. They're out there producing horses beautifully. And I said, I want you to be like them. I don't want you just to come there and I want to win the junior, I want to win the young rider class or the metre 10. I want you to be able to get on and produce horses. And when your horse has a problem, be able to fix it. And what, as coaches, I think that's what we've got to do with our younger riders. Not only teach them how to ride in the ring, but teach them how to educate the horses, become better horse people as well. The horsemanship side of it can be lost a bit with the competition side of it. So, yeah, I think that's how I feel about it. And I think that's why the coaching's so important to me, just trying to get that message through.
Do you feel competitors in Western Australia really feel the gap between what's going on in the East and what's happening in the West? I don't know how you did it back then with the old trucks and everything, but it's such a huge trip with the horses to come to a show on the East side.
Yeah, I think there's a few riders that feel they'll let some of the young riders coming up get opportunities to go and stay with riders in the East. But you get Caitlin Bolger and Rosie Oliver went over for a few weeks just recently, and they try to do a little bit over there, and they'd love to be over there all the time. But again, it all gets back to cost. I know Caitlin, she breeds quite a few, and so she's got commitments back here, so she can't be away for long periods of time. There are other riders, young riders here. There's someone like Rick Dabner that went over at the end of last year and did so well at Bunning. It's just a matter of trying to get that opportunity. It's not like the old days where we'd travel over east, and if you didn't want to do a big show, then you go off and do a few ag shows to build up the prize money, and then you'd go back to the bigger shows. But I think there was a big group of riders that would all do the same shows, and we all seem to earn enough to keep going. That isn't the case now. Yeah, there's quite a lot of talented riders here that I would love to see go east and spend time over east, but it's just all a matter of cost. But as I said, we've got riders like Caitlin. Rosie's got a super horse, so she'll want to go back. Caitlin's Grey Stallion's great. Rick Dabner's got 2 super horses, and they breed, him and his partner, Jarvis, breed wonderful horses. And they've got a paddock full of super bred horses, and Rick's a really good producer. He's one of those riders that knows how to produce horses properly. So I'd love to see them on the East Coast a lot more. But you've got to keep earning a living at the same time. And if they had a big corporate sponsor, they're not going to get there.
Yeah.
Short trip.
Especially with fuel prices.
Oh, yeah. Like now, God, you wouldn't want to be travelling east. Yeah. So I think that's where we are. There's a group of, as I said, there's a group of young riders here now that are coming through that probably have parents that are able to send them east for short periods of time. Yeah, it's just trying to, and when young riders go over, they're trying to get them with people over that side of the world that will look after them. I know Phil Lever and his crew, they're very good if you can get in with them. And I shouldn't just pick him out because he's a West Australian. I think got to check his name in there somewhere. Laurie was a great mate of mine. He was part of that whole big thing here back in the old days. But yeah, but as I said, the old days are gone. We've got to get with the new system now, and the breeding seems to be what it's all about. And we've got to end up with great horses that not everyone can go out and buy top horses in Europe and bring them back, but some can, and that's fair enough. That's the way the system works in Europe, and it'll probably end up that way here. And I won't say unfortunate. I think that's just the way our sport has evolved. Yeah.
So, Les, we've got a tradition on the podcast where each guest leaves a question for the next guest without knowing who that guest will be. Your question comes from Sarah McMillan, and she would like to know, what mistake did you make on course that changed the way you rode forever?
It's funny. I didn't know what you were going to ask me, but you couldn't have asked me a better question. As I said, I come over here in 1981 with my horses. And as I said, I had the fastest round in the jump off, and I had a fence down. And after the class, Sue Bond came up to me and she said, Les, if you had a set up to that fence done before, you would have won the Bond Derby. And that one thing that she said to me changed my whole way of thinking about the way I rode. Like, it really got me focusing on my position. I had a wonderful horse, this Fairway that I was riding, and I think I just never thought he'd had one down. And when I look at the video, that I could see exactly what I was done. So that one thing, that one thing that she said to me was indelible, was like inked onto my brain. And every coach that I've had some wonderful coaches, George Morris, the Irish guys that used to come over here. Look, Gilbert Bachman, he was a great coach as well. Rod Brown, when he used to do the squads, they always say the same thing to me. So that one thing has been indelible in my mind, and I've tried to improve that. Every time I get on a horse and jump it, I think about what Sue said to me that day. That's the one thing.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
great. Or Sarah will be really happy that you had an answer for that. That's brilliant. And have you got a question you'd like to leave for the next guest?
Yeah, we've got some great horses and great riders in this country, and some of them are lucky enough to go over to Europe or America. But one of your recent guests brought it up, maybe Sam brought it up, about time faults, how much in these bigger classes and our bigger shows, and certainly when we go to Europe or America, our riders have like time faultitis for a while until they get with the system. So my question to the next guest is, how do we go about training our riders to just ride a little bit more up-tempo so we get rid of these time faults? So is it a rider thing or is it a course designer thing? I don't know, but I think that's something that Australian riders are going to get their head around if they're going to go to World Cup finals, go to Europe, jump in Nations Cups, America, wherever. That seems to be our one Achilles heel. That's my question.
Right, and that is a brilliant question. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the answer on that. Thank you so much, Les, for joining me this evening. It's been so nice to meet you and chat with you, and it's such an interesting tale, and I'm sure that people are going to love listening to this episode. So thank you very much.
Joe, thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate it.